The river lay ahead, coiling through the canyon like a strip of molten silver, reflecting the last fire of the sun as it dipped behind the buttes. My horse snorted at the scent of water, hooves crunching through the dry gravel. I had been riding for days without a word spoken to another soul, and I had grown used to silence. Silence in the land, silence in my chest. That evening, though, the silence broke. At first it was faint, swallowed by the current's roar, a cry, sharp and desperate. I pulled on the reins, listening. Then I saw her, just a flicker of pale arms thrashing in the torrent. A dark dress twisted around her body, dragging her down as the current spun her like driftwood. For a moment I hesitated. The river was swollen from storm runoff, frothing white over jagged stone, eager to drag down anything that dared it. But hesitation is a luxury a drowning soul cannot afford. I threw myself from the saddle and into the water. The cold struck like knives. The current slammed me sideways, rocks scraping my ribs, but I fought through, lungs burning. She went under once, twice, each time her hands clawing at nothing. I pushed forward, fingers reaching through bubbles and shadows until I caught her wrist. She was lighter than I expected, but the river fought to keep her. My boots snagged against stones, current tearing us both downriver. Somehow, with a final surge, I dragged her toward the shallows and onto the mud-choked bank. She coughed water, body shaking in violent spasms. I rolled to my side, spitting grit, chest heaving. For long minutes neither of us spoke, the only sound the river muttering behind us. When her breathing steadied, I turned to her. She was young, maybe in her late teens, though the hollow set of her eyes made her seem older. Her lips were pale, her hair black with water and clinging to her cheeks. She did not speak, not even a whisper of thanks. She only stared at me as if I had stolen her from someone else's possession. Dusk swallowed the canyon. I built a fire with trembling hands, striking sparks until flame licked at the gathered twigs. She sat across from me, her body wrapped in my saddle blanket, face flickering between shadow and firelight. The silence pressed heavy, thicker than the night air. I asked her name. She did not answer. I asked where she came from, if anyone was looking for her. Still nothing. Just those eyes fixed on me like the fire was burning my soul bare. I told myself I would see her to the nearest town, leave her with a family or the sheriff, and be on my way. But even as the thought formed, I knew it would not be so simple. There was something in the way she clung to the edge of the firelight, unwilling to step away, as though the darkness held some threat only she could see. She was alive because of me, and in that fact lay a tether neither of us had chosen. Later, when I lay down with my hat over my face, trying for sleep, I felt her presence. She had shifted closer to the fire, her eyes glinting in the embers. I pretended not to notice, but inside I understood. She would not leave me now, not tonight, perhaps not ever. I had pulled her out of death's grip, and now she was bound to me in some wordless way. The wind carried the low cry of coyotes across the plain, their voices rising and falling like a mournful hymn. The girl did not flinch. She only sat there, gaze fixed on me, the flames painting her face in restless orange. I thought then of the river, how easily it could have claimed her, how close it had come to claiming me alongside her. Saving her had felt like the right thing, perhaps the only thing. But as the night deepened, unease coiled in my chest. She had not chosen to be saved. That was my choice, not hers. And now, in the glow of the fire, with her silence like a weight upon the air, I wondered what exactly I had pulled from the water, and what shadows followed her onto this bank of earth. Sleep came fitfully, broken by dreams of cold water dragging me under. Each time I woke, she was there, sitting by the fire as if she had never moved. By dawn, when the first pale light crept into the canyon, I understood what the night had already told me. Wherever I went, she would follow. The river had given her back, but not freely. It had bound her to me, and there would be no setting her adrift again. She walked behind me as if tethered by an invisible rope, never speaking, never slowing. Day after day, the rhythm of hooves on dirt and the rasp of wind across the prairie became our only conversation. Her bare feet struck the ground with a kind of stubborn grace, bleeding once, scabbing over, then hardening like stone. I offered her a place on the saddle more than once. She refused each time with a shake of the head, her gaze steady, unblinking. It was as though she had decided that to follow was her penance, and to ride would be a lie. When we reached the first town, I thought perhaps she would break away. The streets were alive with noise, wagons creaking, boots striking wood, a piano jangling from a saloon where voices roared in laughter. I dismounted, tied my horse, and turned to see her at the edge of the dust street, watching everything with the same stillness she had given me since the river. Folks noticed her quickly. Their gazes lingered on her too long, whispers rising like gnats. A boy pointed and muttered to his mother, who pulled him away. To them she must have seemed like a ghost dragged out of the current, a specter clinging to the living. Inside the saloon, the air smelled of whiskey and tobacco. She followed me in, shadowing every step. Men turned from their cards to stare. A barmaid set down a bottle mid-stride, eyes narrowing. Someone at the piano hit a sour note. I felt the room shift against me, the weight of suspicion tightening around us both. I ordered a drink, tried to ignore the way their whispers built, but the truth was plain. Her silence unsettled them. Perhaps it unsettled me more. That night outside the town on the edge of a dry wash, I unrolled my blanket under a thin canopy of stars. She settled across from me, her hands folded around something small that glinted faintly in the firelight. It was a locket, dented and tarnished, the chain broken. She pressed it between her palms, as if it were the last thing keeping her anchored to this world. When she dozed, her lips moved, fragments of words slipping into the night. I caught pieces. "Don't let him." "Can't breathe." "River." I wanted to shake her awake, to demand answers, but I did not. I simply sat there listening, realizing that her silence by day was not emptiness but fear bound tight. The road bent south into country rougher than any map cared to mark. Mesas loomed like dark sentinels. The heat shimmered off the ground, the air full of grit. One afternoon, as we watered the horse by a shallow creek, riders appeared on the rise. 3 men, lean and sharp-eyed, their coats dusty, rifles across their saddles. They spoke low to each other, then turned their eyes to us. My gut tightened. The tallest of them described aloud the figure they were hunting. A girl, young, dark hair, runaway. The description slid across the air like a blade. I felt her shift behind me, her breathing shallow. The men watched with lazy interest, their hands not far from their holsters. I answered with calm words, feigning ignorance, though my hand drifted near the butt of my revolver. The moment stretched thin. One man smirked, tapped ash from his cigarette, and spat into the dust. At last they wheeled their horses and rode off, though I knew they would not ride far. They had caught the scent. When we moved on, she followed closer than ever, her eyes flicking to the ridges, as if expecting them to appear again at any moment. For the first time since the river, I felt her fear not as something separate, but as something shared, passed between us in silence. I realized I had stepped into her struggle without knowing the cost. And though I told myself I could turn her loose, leave her at the next settlement, the truth dug into me like a spur. I would not. That night the sky burned red with the last light of sunset, a storm building on the horizon. The air smelled of rain, heavy and electric. She sat by the fire, the locket in her hand, watching me with those unblinking eyes. I wanted to ask her again who she was running from, why the men hunted her, but the words tangled in my throat. Instead, I said nothing, and in that silence, a decision took root. The storm broke with sudden violence, wind whipping the fire to sparks. She shifted closer to me under the blanket, trembling, though whether from the cold or the memory of pursuit I could not tell. I lay awake listening to the thunder, feeling her presence pressed against my shoulder. And in that moment I knew the river had not simply spared her, it had bound her to me, and me to whatever shadows haunted her steps. I did not yet know their names, nor the full weight of her silence, but I could feel them waiting, gathering beyond the storm. The canyon walls rose like rusted blades on either side of us, shadows stretching long across the stony ground. I had chosen the narrow pass to avoid the open plain, but as soon as the echo of hooves broke the still air, I knew I had led us into a trap. Dust rolled from the ridge above, followed by the silhouettes of riders. 3, then 5, rifles slung across their saddles, eyes hard with purpose. The girl froze behind me, her hand clutching the edge of my coat as if by instinct. The first shot cracked, shattering stone inches from my head. My horse reared, screaming, and I threw myself behind a boulder, dragging her with me. Gunfire roared through the canyon, sparks leaping from rock as bullets chewed the stone to dust. My revolver was in my hand before I had thought to draw it. I fired once, twice, the echoes booming between the cliffs. One rider tumbled from his saddle, his horse bolting into the dust. The girl pressed low against the ground, her face streaked with grit, but she did not scream. She only watched me with those wide, silent eyes, and something in them urged me to fight harder than I had in years. A round tore through my sleeve, grazing flesh, the burn sharp and hot. I gritted my teeth, steadied my aim, and drove the attackers back with wild shots. The canyon swallowed their retreat, but I knew they had not vanished. They would circle back, patient as wolves. When the silence finally fell, broken only by the labored breathing of my horse, I felt her hands on my arm. She had torn a strip from her dress and pressed it against the bleeding graze. Her touch was quick, efficient, as though she had done it before. I stared at her, searching for some word, some explanation, but all she gave me was a fleeting glance before returning to her work. For the first time, I realized she was not merely surviving at my side. She was tending to me, as if saving my life repaid the debt of hers. Night fell heavy, storm clouds nodding above us. I built a small fire beneath an overhang, the flames struggling against the damp air. She sat close, the heat painting her face in flickers. At last she spoke, voice thin, cracked with disuse. "He tried to drown me," she whispered, the words trembling like fragile glass. I lifted my head, the fire's pop the only other sound. "Who?" I asked. She clutched the locket in her hand, thumb rubbing over the dented surface until her skin reddened. Her voice faltered, then gathered strength from somewhere deep within. "The man who kept me. The one they ride for? He said I was his. Said I had no right to leave. When I tried, he—" She broke off, her eyes glistening in the firelight, though no tears fell. She opened her palm, showing faint scars along her wrist, white against the grime. "He threw me in the river. Thought it would be quiet, clean, but I came up again. You pulled me out." I sat still, the weight of her confession settling over me like the storm clouds above. I had known she carried shadows, but I had not expected them to have a name, a face, a rage sharp enough to command riders across the desert. She turned to me, eyes fierce now, as though daring me to deny her story. I did not. I only nodded once, slowly. She seemed to take strength from that. She leaned closer to the fire, her voice low but steadier. "They'll keep coming. He won't stop until I'm gone for good." She closed the locket and pressed it into my hand, her fingers lingering for a moment. "If they take me again, don't let me live. Promise." The words lodged in my chest like a bullet. I looked down at the trinket, its chain broken, its weight heavier than iron. My hand closed around it. And though I did not speak the promise aloud, she seemed to hear it in the silence between us. When dawn broke, it did so red as spilled blood, light spilling across the canyon walls. I cleaned my revolver with deliberate care, checked my horse's tack, and waited for her to rise. She moved with quiet resolve, fastening the blanket around her shoulders like a cloak. There was no fear in her expression now, only a grim patience, as if she had been walking toward this fight long before the river tried to take her. I mounted, watching the horizon bleed with morning. She climbed up behind me, uninvited yet certain, her hands resting lightly against my sides. I felt her weight there, fragile yet determined. The river had bound us, but now the desert itself seemed to push us forward. I knew the riders would return. I knew the man she spoke of would come with them. And I knew I would not let her face him alone. The wind carried the scent of rain, the storm not yet spent. I touched the locket once, tucked safe in my pocket, and urged the horse forward. Whatever lay ahead, it had already chosen us. The mesa rose from the desert like the back of a scarred beast, its cliffs jagged and red beneath the morning sun. Dust swirled in the air, stirred by the hooves of waiting horses. The riders had gathered, more than before, half a dozen at least, their silhouettes sharp against the sky. At their center sat a broad man draped in a black coat despite the heat, a scar splitting his cheek like lightning carved into flesh. His gaze fixed on the girl as though she were already in his grasp. We reined in at the canyon's edge. The horse shivered beneath me, sensing the tension while her hands tightened around my waist. The world seemed to hold its breath. The man in the black coat called out, his voice echoing off the stone, steady and cruel. "You've carried something that belongs to me. Hand her over and maybe I'll let you ride out alive." Her breath hitched against my back, but she did not move. I felt the press of her silence stronger than any words. I answered for her, my voice low. "She doesn't belong to you. She doesn't belong to anyone." Laughter broke from the men, jagged and humorless. The rancher, because that's what he was, the one she had spoken of, leaned forward in his saddle, eyes narrowing. "You think she follows you because she's free?" "No, she follows because she has nowhere else to go. You'll learn that once she drains the life from you too." The words slid off me, though they cut into her. I felt her stiffen, and in that moment I understood. He was not only a captor, but a voice that had twisted her silence into chains. The only answer was fire. The first shot cracked the air, exploding stone near my head. I kicked the horse forward, dragging her with me into the storm. Gunfire roared across the mesa, bullets chipping the rocks, filling the air with dust and powder smoke. I wheeled left, firing blind, each recoil jarring up my arm. One rider fell, his horse bolting into the haze. Another swung around, rifle raised. She moved before I could, grabbing a fistful of sand and flinging it into his face. His shot went wild. She tore the pistol from his holster and fired clumsily but true. He dropped, clutching his chest. The fight broke into chaos. Horses screamed, men shouted, the air a storm of grit and blood. I ducked behind a boulder, reloaded with shaking hands, then rose to put two more down. Pain flared through my arm where a bullet grazed me, but I held steady. She crouched beside me, her breath ragged, pistol clenched tight. For the first time, her eyes burned not with fear, but with fury. When the smoke cleared, only the man in the black coat remained. He dismounted slowly, boots crunching on gravel, revolver gleaming in his hand. His voice carried, cold as the river's pull. "You can't keep her. She's mine." "Always was." He looked at her, ignoring me as if I were already dead. "Come here. You know how this ends." She shook her head just once and stepped behind me. My hand hovered near my holster, fingers itching. The mesa fell silent, only the wind whispering through the stone. He raised his revolver. I raised mine. Time stretched thin, thinner still, until the world balanced on the edge of a heartbeat. The draw was fast, brutal, final. The blast rang like thunder across the canyon. He staggered, a dark stain spreading across his chest, eyes wide in disbelief before he crumpled into the dust. The silence afterward was heavier than any gunfire. She stood still, staring at the body. Her shoulders trembled, though whether from relief or rage I could not tell. At last, she lowered the pistol, her fingers loosening as though they no longer had strength to cling to it. She turned to me, her eyes wet but unbroken, lips parting as though to speak. No words came, only the ghost of a smile, small, fragile, but real. We gathered what we could from the fallen, mounted the horse, and rode toward the horizon. The sky opened wide before us, the storm broken, the air washed clean by wind. She leaned lightly against me, no longer clutching with desperation, but resting with a strange, quiet trust. As the mesa shrank behind us, I thought of the river, of how it had nearly claimed her, and how in saving her I had tied my fate to hers. The desert stretched endless ahead, offering no answers, only the promise of more roads and more storms. But for the first time, she was not silent. Her voice came soft, almost carried away by the wind. A single word that was not a name but a beginning. And I knew then that though I had pulled her from the water, it was she who had pulled me from the solitude that had been drowning me all along.